What words come to your mind when you hear the word church? Go on. What words come to mind? Family, yeah.
Living souls.
Living souls, fantastic. Believers, yeah. What other words come?
Faith.
Faith, yeah. Fellowship, yeah. Love, yeah. Belonging. Buildings, yeah. Don't get too down on buildings, because there's a wonderful Irish theologian I like. He's a bit bonkers, called Pete Rollins. And he said, saying that the church isn't about buildings is a bit like saying your clothes don't matter. You'd be jolly cold without them, wouldn't you? But yeah. Anything else? Love, yeah. Jesus, yeah. If we were to ask that question to the world, and that's the people that you meet day in, day out, what's church about? What words would come to mind then? What would they say, words-wise? I'll tell you the ones I hear. Cold, empty, uncomfortable, boring, yeah. Oh, the number of people who've told me to my face, all vicars are boring. And you say, how many vicars do you know? And they say, well, I know you. To which I usually say, do you think I'm boring? They say, no. And then you say, well, you're a bit stuck there, really, aren't you? What else? Hypocrites, yeah, we get level with that. Blue rinse, yeah. One church I know, all the old ladies decided to have a purple rinse for Lent. Led by Pete Broadbent, a bishop of Willesden. He had a blue rinse, a purple rinse for Lent. Anything else?
Someone asked me here, what church?
What church? Yes, people don't see it. Yeah. Out of touch, yeah, definitely.
They always want your money.
They always want your money, yeah. Oh, I hate asking for money for church for that reason, really. That's what people expect you to talk about, don't they? Money. Anything else? It's interesting, isn't it? One of the things I once asked a church this same question, and I used to do a lot of church weekends. I hope to do some more. But this one church, big church, a bit like Coley really, they said authoritarian came out in the first session. And I thought, oh, something's gone wrong there. And sure enough, it had gone wrong. Authoritarian. I think people see the dog collars and they see the suits in nonconformist churches or whatever, really. And they see some sense in which there's a lot of authority stuff going on and power and things like that. Whereas actually that might not be so, but it looks like it. I think that's the point. If we think about what's church, this is quite an old cartoon. This is from Punch, and it's 1917. And as you can see, it says, the Reverend Sylvanus Jones will preach next Sunday on what's wrong with the church. Can you see what's wrong with the church? It's falling down, yeah. But what is church is a really interesting question. And it's one which is coming up in the modern church quite a lot, because people are starting to say, if it's not buildings, what is it? Or what could it be? Could it be quite different? And I want to give you a broad vision of what church is. This is the reading we've just had. Many of them believed this message and were baptized. And about 3,000 people were added to the group that day, and they spent their time in learning from the apostles, taking part in the fellowship, and sharing in the fellowship meals and the prayers. There's another passage as well a bit later on where it talks about them sharing everything as well. So there's a kind of resource thing went on. And you get basic elements that come from that I would suggest that you should be able to find in anything that you want to put the label church on. Church is a gathering of people around Jesus. So whoever said Jesus, that's spot on, who are concerned with belonging, learning, fellowship, sharing the fellowship meals, whatever they are, prayer, and resourcing. Sit on those words for a minute, see what you think. Have a think about them. There is something about church that is about belonging. It's not just about drifting in and out like you might go to the pictures or something. Though some people do that. Something about learning. Any group of Christians who are being church are usually learning communities. Fellowship, that's a commitment to each other, even though you wouldn't normally have one. Sharing the fellowship meals. That's quite an interesting one because people think it means communion, but it might not be. It might be like the tots, having toast together. That might be church. It certainly feels like it. And finally, prayer, of course, and resourcing again, talking about money. And any gathering where Christians are doing that kind of thing, you can do this two ways. You can look at something and say, are all those things happening? And you can say, well, that must be church then. Or for a church, sometimes it's quite a good idea to look at what you're already doing and saying, are any of those things missing? And it might be just quite a simple thing, like, for instance, my last choir at my last church did all of those things apart from praying together. So they introduced prayers at the beginning of their quiet practice, and lo and behold, they transformed themselves overnight from being a choir, resourcing the church, to being a kind of church as well. It's just quite interesting. There's a lot of that going on at the moment. The standard approach to creating groups is that they're kind of a stepping stone into church. That's one of the ways in which people think of evangelism. So if you like, people in the world are over here somewhere, probably a bit further, maybe even further. But anyway, you know what I mean. Over here. And the church is over here. So you've got to try and think of a way of getting them from there over here. And it's a big jump to go all that way. And so you think of little stepping stones you might take. So, for instance, you might say that the first contact might be, we've had a baby. All right, good. Congratulations. Would you like to come to TOTS? Yes, we'll come to TOTS. Would you like to come to family service? Yes, we'd like to come to family service. Would you like to come more often than family service? Yes, we would. We're coming to church. We're going to PCC. We've become a vicar. And now we're the bishop. People kind of have that idea, don't they, that they sort of progress their way along stepping stones. I'm being a bit mean, really, but it does kind of work. But there is another approach, which is if they're over here and you're over there, can anybody think what the other approach to making them come over here might be? You go over there. Yeah, it's quite interesting, but a lot of churches just don't get this. It's very, very hard, actually, to do that. Because it means that some things which you really cherish in your church have to change. For one thing, the language might have to change dramatically. The things that you wear might have to change dramatically to do that journey. There are all sorts of issues where you might, and I don't need you to get this wrong, it costs a lot to do that journey. You will find that it's hard. I mean, I've made that journey a few times, and it's really difficult to be over there. It's not a comfortable place to be. It really isn't. It's much safer to come about halfway and be here and say, hello. Yeah. It's much easier to do that than to go all that way. It's a long journey to make. And that's where you've got to think about what Jesus did. If we're there, he's up there somewhere, on the top of the tower. And he came all the way down, as it were. It says in Philippians that he emptied himself of everything. And he came and he became obedient and he became a servant. And he made that great journey. If you like, Jesus is the supreme example of somebody who came from right over there to be alongside us. So one of the first things to think about in terms of new ways of being church is to think of it kind of the other way around. I've got a picture of it here. Fresh Expressions is more about crossing the river ourselves and creating church where people are. And that can be really quite difficult, I think. And it needs a bit of an imagination, and sometimes it needs a different kind of vision. You probably are familiar with a normal picture of vision, which is that you kind of do this with your eyes. That's what you do with vision, don't you? You open your eyes wider, like that. Somebody having a vision has got wide eyes. Well, sometimes vision's about screwing your eyes up a bit, so that something which you think might be one thing could be something else. That's what vision's about. And one of the interesting things about the early church, which is not talked about very much, is that it was based on, it wasn't based on the temple, it was actually based in people's homes, and that those homes were based around the Jewish domestic liturgy, which was led by women often, because it was in the home. And so the interesting thing about the early church was it was meeting in homes and following domestic liturgy. And so as the church grew, it grew in that context, not in the temple. And it was only about 200-300 years in that they started moving out into the big temple stuff and the civic stuff, which is kind of what we've got around us here. So one of the journeys we might have to make from there to there is to become a bit more like the early church, a bit more domestic. Now, much of my training has been about small churches and fresh expressions. The reason is that, do you like that picture? I love it. These are by Martin Parr, who is a wonderful photographer. He makes me laugh. And this is actually one service, though they're all pointing in different directions, which I find quite funny. And clearly, the people upstairs are very different to the people downstairs. That's why they've gone up there. So one of the things I've been doing a lot of training is in small churches. And one of the strange things that's happened of me working with small churches to help them see how they might do this journey from there to there is that bigger churches have been coming to me and saying, how can we be more like the small ones? Because there's a funny statistic. You might remember a while ago now, there was a thing called the Decade of Evangelism. It happened, I think, from 1990 to 2000, something like that. And I don't know whether anybody told you this, but if you take out the top 10 biggest churches in Wakefield Diocese, take out the big ones, in that period, the Church of England in Wakefield Diocese grew dramatically. If you put the big ones back in, it flatlined. So the smaller churches and the medium-sized churches were growing, and the bigger churches were either shrinking or flattening. And so there are issues for a big church like ours to think about, and this is why I used to get invited to go and do weekends for big churches. How can you behave more like a small one? And we'll think of what the advantages are of being small. The advantage of being small means you've got flexibility, adaptability, and good fellowship. You don't need to plan your services 3 months in advance. I couldn't quite believe it, but we were nearly planning Christmas before I arrived. And I don't mean last Christmas, I mean next Christmas. And that kind of thing needs to happen with a big church. You need to plan ahead. But that doesn't give you the chance to say, tell you what, there's 6 of us meeting here together. Next week, let's get in the car and go up on the moors, shall we? You can do that with a small church. So one of the ways in which big churches are thinking about how they can be like that again is to actually chop themselves up a little bit and have little groups. And that's one way which I know you've been using to grow little congregations that I've seen around, little groups of people who are doing those things. Remember that we looked at the beginning, that list of things that the church is doing. So the advantage of being small is that you can literally fit the whole church in 3 cars and go off somewhere. And if bigger churches want to have that kind of adaptability and flexibility, they need to find ways in which they can chop themselves up a bit. There are disadvantages of being small. There's a lack of resources and people, making tasks difficult to do. I love this man. Stood on 1 foot, but of that era where he's wearing a tie and a hat. Health and safety, isn't it? If you've got a hat on, nothing bad can happen to you. And so what we see there really is there's a disadvantage. But guess what happens? If there's only 6 people in the church, those 6 people are very talented, aren't they? Or could be, because they have to do everything. The problem with bigger churches is sometimes is that it's very easy to be there and do absolutely nothing. And that's wonderful. If you've got a very busy life, it's fabulous and it's what you need. If you're serving God through the week on a Sunday, you need to come somewhere where you don't have to do anything, really. And I appreciate that. There's not a problem with that. But there are some problems in that people drop through the gaps a bit, don't they? They can do. And you can get very talented people who don't bring those gifts and skills that are there not only to help the world, but also to build up the body of Christ. They don't get a chance to do it. So again, one of the things I think bigger churches need to think about is to what extent can we somehow or other not let that happen. One of the churches I know in Leeds that's much bigger than this, St George's, where my son goes, they actually have a Sunday once a year where it's a bit like a recruitment fair. They have tables out from all their things that people do, and you go along and you sit at a table and you have a chat with whoever runs whatever, the Sunday school or the TOTS group or the this group or the that group. And you say, what are you about? And they say, what are you about? And, ooh, do you want to work with us? And they say, oh yeah, let's. It's very peculiar, but why not? To make sure that nobody gets missed out, if they don't want to be missed out. One of the things that you can do with smaller churches as well is you can get help from outside agencies. There's still a bit of that round, and the diocese does help with turnaround teams, which have you heard about those? Some of you have been involved with them, haven't you, I think? The diocese, up to quite recently, had small groups of people who would go into a church that's struggling and get alongside people and help. One of my great visions for Coley would be is that we become the kind of church that people say, do you know what, we need a bit of a hand. Would you like to come and give us a hand? From all our blessings that we have here, why not? To actually offer to churches that are struggling a bit of a leg up and a bit of a hand. Wouldn't it be great if we could get to that position? The thing that's hard about that is we have to get people to trust us, and that's going to take some time. It won't be easy to get there. Trust is very hard in that situation because they think you're taking over. So you have to find a way of doing that. But lots of churches, they're just a bit bigger than here, have been able to do that. I know that St. George's do it, HTB do it. Lots of big churches do that kind of thing, and we could do that too if they let us. And the other thing is to look completely outside the church and build something new. Church plant, which I've done before, and that's very hard work, but can be very rewarding for the 30 or 40 people that reaches. I'm not looking to do it just yet, though. So what are the advantages of being bigger? I want you to talk to the person next to you about what you think the advantages are of being bigger, for a bigger church. What's good for you, being part of a bigger church? Go on, talk to the people around you, because I don't know. More money. Sorry? Sharing the load, yeah, definitely. In theory, anyway.
Yeah.
Anything else about being bigger that's good? More resources, definitely. That makes a huge difference. I was talking with a friend of mine who's just gone into her first curacy, and she said the really difficult thing is that as a curate, she'd come from a big church with lots of resources. She'd been to a college and she'd been placed in churches to be trained that are big churches with lots of resources because they're really good at training people. And she's come out and she's gone to a church as her first incumbency. Guess what it hasn't got? Loads of resources. It's got hardly anybody really. And she says nobody's training people to actually start from nothing, which is kind of what you've got with a lot of places. So, yeah, you've got a sort of cushion really. Anything else about being big that's good? Better funding, definitely, yeah.
Dialogue. There's far more people with alternative thoughts or
Yeah.
these kinds of things.
Yeah. Can I use a phrase with you that I've heard lots of people say about bigger churches? There are more people like me. Because the bigger you are, the more chance there is that there'll be somebody like you. So if you go to a very big church, there's more likely to be somebody your age, your stage, your interests, your profession, that kind of thing. Yeah. Because in a small church, you really will be a mixture of people. So, what are the disadvantages of being bigger? We've covered some of them. Just talk briefly to the people around you what the disadvantages are. What are the disadvantages?
You can sit on the back row and not do anything and nobody will notice.
Yeah.
If you want to be noticed, you may not be noticed.
Yes, if you're somebody like me who's noisy and wants to be the star, you could easily fade into the background because lots of other people going me. Yeah, difficult.
Sometimes we can lose people and not notice.
Yeah. The classic one with my friends who've been to big churches is you've been there for 5 years and somebody still says on the door, "Hello, are you new here?" That happens and it's a bit irritating.
On that tack for fading, you could be lost.
Yeah. That phrase "lost" is a really important one because losing people, I mean, the whole of many of Jesus' parables, as you know, lost son, lost coin, there's a lot of lostness in Jesus' teaching, which is basically saying he goes after the lost, and the implication is we need to go after the lost as well, really, and use resources to do that. It's difficult. Any other disadvantages? Communication, it's a nightmare. I have no idea what's going on at this church. I discovered there was a prayer meeting on a Thursday evening the other day. I never knew it was there. I ought to read the notice sheet, I know. But, I mean, you don't, do you, when you knew? That's my excuse anyway, and I'm sticking to it. But it's very difficult. A lot of people hold a picture in their heads of the world that they move through. They have a kind of and there's a limited capacity to what you can hold in your head. There have been experiments done on this that you can manage about 120 people, most people, that they can know, and beyond that it gets really difficult. There are some exceptional people who can manage up to 10,000, but there are very few of those around. But yeah, and you'll know some of them. There are some people who seem to know everybody, but most people know about 100, 120 people. It's about the size of an Old English village, or an Old English parish for that matter. Practicalities. These are the 5 things then, or 6 if you include resourcing, to belonging, learning, fellowship, meals, prayer and resourcing. For smaller churches, these are always harder. For bigger churches, most of them, it's easier. Belonging is quite an interesting one in terms of practicalities. Some of that's about brand. It's an awful word, but we have to use it. It's what advertisers would call brand, a sense that you belong to something. It's why we all buy Heinz tomato ketchup, because we're familiar with it and we sort of own it, really. And if you buy something different, you still call it probably ketchup, even though it says on the front of it something else. It's interesting. And we all have Hoovers, don't they? Or do you all have Dysons? Anyway, you have a name, don't you? Even though it's not one of those. And we all use sellotape, don't we, at Christmas, even though it might not be called sellotape. So there is a funny thing with that. I think learning's interesting. Learning's different to teaching, and you'll hear me say this a lot. Learning goes on in good churches and is easier in smaller ones. Teaching is easier in bigger ones, but that's not the same thing as learning. You can teach lots. I don't want to put anybody down because I've never been, but I know from my last church where lots of people went to New Wine, whenever they came back, I'd say, how was it? They'd say, it was brilliant. The worship was wonderful. The teaching was fantastic. And I would say, not to be wicked, but so what did you learn then? And they'd say, oh, well, the teaching was good and the worship was amazing. You know, and actually, it's an issue. You know, what have you learnt, really?
A lot of teachers fall into that.
Yeah. I mean, I know this because this is what my wife tells me.
They believe they've given a good lesson.
Yeah, because...
The students have learnt nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they've learnt completely the wrong thing. Yeah.
The government of the day, whoever it is,
Yeah.
puts a lot of emphasis on teaching.
Yeah.
And Mr. Gorgon people don't put any emphasis
Yeah.
on learning.
Chavez Finn spending too much time weighing the pig and not enough time teaching it. Yeah. And the fellowship meals, we need to work harder at that, I think, probably. And prayer. So, 4 issues for small churches. Practicalities. One of the ways in which you can work is you can make existing church groups following the base church patterns into more like church. So it's worth having a sit down sometime and think, our flower rangers, I don't know whether you have a flower rangers group here, but you might have. Flower rangers and groups are often prayerful. They're often people who have great fellowship together, but they may be missing having meals together, and they may not be in a position where some of those other things are real for them. And maybe they need to think about that. Maybe we ought to say we've got a very strange house group here that they arrange flowers for the services. Willow Creek in America used to have what they called the chairs house group. And they were the people who put the chairs out before the service. And they were generally older people, and they had a great commitment to each other. They prayed together, they had fellowship together, they had meals together, and they put chairs out before the service. They could have been a bunch of people who handled chairs, but in fact what they were was a kind of mini church, really. It's a great thing. Maintenance groups in church, similarly, with a bit of an oomph and a bit of a push and a bit of a struggle, you can actually squeeze a maintenance group to be kind of like a sort of weird kind of house group that does maintenance work. Best example I ever knew of this was when I worked in the centre of Manchester. A lot of people there had real problems with cleaning. They didn't know how to do it. They'd never been taught. And so our vicar's wife there used to have the vicarage cleaning house group. And a bunch of ladies used to come round her house. They would meet together. They would have coffee together. They would have Bible study together. And they would also clean the house together. And if any of you want to set up a cleaning house group, do you see what I'm saying? It's a kind of a weird way of thinking about life. But with adding a few things in, you can actually move beyond what we're used to. Establishing new groups on a skeletal basis. What that means is that you can actually just do things in a very simple way and do one a month or one every 6 months or one every year, or these can actually happen. There is nowhere in the Bible where it says everything has to happen every fortnight. And yet, how many of our groups meet every fortnight, don't they? It's what you do. They don't have to. They can meet more frequently or less frequently. Yeah, absolutely. I think the quiet day thing that you do here is one of those. It's kind of an odd sort of fellowship group. At half term, I'm going away with 2 other couples who we set up a Bible study group when I was at theological college, and that was 25 years ago, and we only meet really once a year. We now meet with 10 children and a grandchild and another person. And there are 17 of us going away because we have a commitment to each other. We meet once a year and we pray for each other and we have very deep fellowship with each other, but we don't have much to do with each other through the year. Very interesting, really. There are issues about counting numbers and also maintaining connections and resources. That's always difficult in any church. I want to skip forward in a minute, but I think it would be time for us to have a pause and a bit of a worship and a bit of a think about God for a moment or two in case we got lost. So what I'd like to do is for us to stand for a moment with our hymn books. So Lord Jesus, in all this talk about church, help us not to lose sight that you are at the centre of our faith and at the centre of any group of Christians that meet together. Help us not to get lost, but help us rather, having been found in you, to find new ways of being church. Amen. So, would you like to be seated? Practical stuff. Where do you start? If you're going to start thinking about new ways of being church, we've talked about the business of adapting groups that already exist. So where do you start? Well, I think one of the greatest resources that is missed in the church and in the world is passion. It is passion. There is nothing wrong with passion. I am a passionate person. It's one of those things. I could be passionate about a new pair of scissors that I've got. I went to see Life of Pi last week. It's brilliant. The pictures are beautiful. It's fabulous. But I could probably see another film next week and be equally passionate about it. I think there is a thing about being passionate that's really important for us, the Christians, to get in touch with. And so one of the ways I think in which we can unlock where we might have a place to start, a seed to plant, is to think about what you're passionate about. What gets you excited? I know we're from Yorkshire. And we don't have an accent that sounds like we're excited, but we are, aren't we? So I want you to talk with the people around you about what you're passionate about. Don't go any further than that, just about what you're passionate about. Because I know it's hard to sit there on your own and think, what am I passionate about? So let's heat the room up with a bit of passion now. It'll be good. What are you passionate about? Anyway. Okay, let's have a go with these passions. You can challenge me. Come out with your passions and I'll see whether I can make a church out of it. Go for it.
Music.
Music. Easy one, really. Being passionate about music.
And hymn singing.
Yeah, and hymn singing. And all of that kind of thing. But one interesting thing might be a fresh expression that was planted in the Calder Valley was actually a choir. And somebody started a gospel choir as a church. So it was based around learning to sing gospel music. And surprise, surprise, gospel music's quite religious, really. And so this choir, which is now quite strong, quite big, actually, quite influential, has got probably about 25% Christians and 75% people who've never been near church, but they come to sing gospel music, which is all the stuff that we've been singing tonight. So, and that's a kind of church because they pray at the beginning, they have fellowship together, they have a commitment to each other. They're learning about the good news because the conductor has to explain to them what the songs mean because they've no idea what they're singing. And you know how important it is to be able to sing. You've got to know what you're singing about. And so it's quite interesting, really.
We once had a Songs of Praise some years ago, and members of the congregation were invited to choose a hymn which they felt passionate about.
Yeah.
And each one in turn also volunteered to come and stand up there and tell the audience, tell the congregation what it meant to them. And with all kinds of... and this church was full.
Yeah.
And we've never had one since.
We might have a go at that again. Sounds like a good idea. Well, one of the things that went wrong with one of those for me is I did it with a youth group once, and they picked all the military hymns you can think of, really. We had Stand Up for Jesus, Onward Christian Soldiers. We did it all. But anyway. Any other things that people are passionate about? All I'm trying to demonstrate to you is the way that your thinking could skip ahead. If God wants you to. I mean, it might be that God doesn't, but this is the way it kind of works. I will come back to you in a Bible teaching, yeah.
I could fall in the Bible and never come out of it. I just love it. I can read it like a book.
So,
Just read it. I just read. It's just lovely.
one of the models that's very popular in our communities at the moment is the book club. And I've often wondered about whether you could form a group that was a bit like a Bible book club. A different kind of thing where all of you decide, instead of what you do in normal house groups, which is you normally sit around and discuss the passage with it there, actually you go away and you read something and then you come back and talk about it then. There's a different model on how to do things, but I don't think people are doing that at the moment, though Leslie will probably tell me now somebody is here. But that kind of idea of a Bible book club might be a way in which you could grow a new mini congregation. Who knows? Yep, anything else?
I like to write.
You like to write. Writing's really interesting because there are lots of writing groups around in our communities again. And one of the things might be with a writing group is to look at sort of almost like retreats. You know, we're talking about the days away thing that some groups do. You can actually do the equivalent of a Christian day away, doing writing together on a Christian theme. But there isn't anybody doing that at the moment, so we'd have to set that up, won't we?
I've done with somebody else who's 83, and his thoughts on faith, which are extremely strong and extremely wise. We're just coming to the end of a project there, which we've been on for 12 months.
Yeah.
But it's only 2 hours every Monday. And
that sounds like a big commitment, only 2 hours every Monday. But
it is. We've done about 16 sessions of about 1,000 words on all sorts of the topics.
Yeah. The other side of writing is the poetry slams, which my eldest son's involved with. And he set up a poetry slam which has Christians and non-Christians at it. So half the poems that come out are Christian ones, half of them are not. And they eat together, they read poems together, they have a time of quiet because they don't all pray. So you can see how that could be, if you screw your eyes up, getting a bit like a church. Yeah. Anything else that's your passion?
Looking after God's world,
Conservation, yeah. Again, this has never happened as far as I know, but there have been churches that have taken on conservation projects. But you could actually open those up to non-Christians and everybody. People who wouldn't come in a building might well work round a building to see the church and its churchyard not as a kind of millstone around your neck, but rather to see it as an asset. We've got an amazing space around here. And it could be an asset because it could be the kind of thing where you say to people, look, we've got all this ivy and we want to pull it out in a nice way that doesn't destroy the environment, getting people involved in that. And you start to build a group of people together. And of course, you'd have to say to them, because this is a holy space, we're going to start with just a time of quiet, just to remember where we are and what we're doing. See what I mean? To build in those prayer times, the fellowship time, the eating time, to think of that, rather than just saying we're going to have a working party, actually make it something which has a spiritual edge. You'd be amazed how many non-Christians are up for something, as I used to say, twinkly, something quiet. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, anybody else who's passionate? I'm just so relieved we haven't had ski electric yet. Walking groups, yeah.
And photography.
In Holy Week, we've got a walk with readings. I've done that before. And again with food, so that you begin the walk with readings. You have readings as you go along. So that's kind of like the teaching element and the fellowship element. And then you have food at the end, share a meal together. And again, you're getting very near.
But you'll get the gist that you like to eat.
Eating's a huge thing. The breaking bread together is a big thing for them. Food was a big thing because they were meeting in people's homes. Everything has food attached to it. It's having been a university chaplain that does that. Anything else for anybody? Yeah, there's one thing that used to frustrate me with my last church was everybody was doing adult education courses, but they wouldn't do a Christian course. And I think there is room for us to do something more like adult ed. like you do a pottery course or you learn French or something like that. Maybe you haven't done a pottery course or learned French. I never had, but I know people who have. But that kind of thing where you say you do a 6-week course on something and then you stop, you might find that would be something that we could build something around. You get the gist of it. What you're passionate about, there's a really good place to start, I think. It's a really, really good question to ask yourself. And I'm not saying you should all go away and do this now, but all I'm saying is that to start to look at the things that you naturally would do, rather than thinking I have to do something odd and peculiar that I don't normally do, might just be a way of doing it. There's a Christian BMX group. There are all sorts of things that I know of where people have just said, this is what I like, this is what I'm passionate about, and getting people together to do something similar, but building into it those reflective times and building into it those times of fellowship. There's a difficulty with numbers. I won't go through. Well, do you want another difficulty with numbers? The problem is with multi-congregations, if I can get it to stick. This is my last church, smaller than here, because we had a regular congregation of about 90 and 154 if we included the Angels group, which was like the Tots group, 169 if you include the youth group, 178 if you include Grapevine, which is the group we had, 188 if you included the midweek service, or about 228 attenders if you looked at the congregation at Crag. So my small church had in total probably about 228 people crossing the door because there were lots of these little groups around. And so one of the issues that there is about lots of little groups is how you count the heads. It is quite difficult, is that? It's not easy to get round, because that was why I was exhausted. And that's why I needed so many vicars. So I had a smaller church with more vicars, because in fact it wasn't really a smaller church. There was a lot of bits of it. And also there's a difficulty of maintaining discipline. Discipline sounds a terrible word, doesn't it? But what that really means is that bungee rope that connects us all together. And if you've got lots of different congregations, there is a need for us to hold together. Why? Because we are still the body of Christ. And we still need each other. And there needs to be a crossover between all these different groups. The Christian Cabbage group needs to meet with the Christian Conservation people sometimes, the cabbages and the Christian Gospel choir needs to meet with the main congregation on Sunday. There's a thing that needs to go on for our own benefit, really. And that was the weaving together that those early disciples had. Even though there were thousands of them, they would still interconnect and meet together from time to time. So then, here we go. There are two conclusions to how you can do fresh expressions. One is that you can make existing groups into church, and it's worth us thinking about that. And the second one is we can use our passions to create new and unique ways of being church. I wasn't sure what I was going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you of the weirdest church I've ever been involved, the weirdest congregation I've ever put together, which was a breastfeeding congregation. Because from a group like Tots, there were lots of mums who said that the only time I have any quiet and any calm is when my baby's breastfeeding. And so I asked around and said, when does that happen? And they said it's at about 11 o'clock, 10 or 11 o'clock, there's a quiet moment. So we used to have 6 ladies who came to my house to breastfeed at 10 o'clock, and we studied the Bible together, and we grew in faith and love to be quite a committed congregation, really, within our group of congregations. That's about the weirdest one, though the wrestling one in the school was quite interesting as well. And every day the Lord added to our number those who he was saving. And all of these people on these pictures here had odd connections with my last church. And if we'd been in a group like this in my last church, most of the people in that church wouldn't have known who these people were, because they were one of these little congregations, this weird stuff that was going on. So we're going to finish in a moment, but what we need to do now, before we finish, is we need to pray. So I suggest you get into groups you've been using, or if you want to make them slightly bigger, you can, and just have a bit of time of open prayer. We'll give you 5 minutes, because we all want to get back for the midwife programme, don't we? And so let's have 5 minutes of open prayer with the people around us, so that we have time to get back for the midwife programme. It might be wise to get into a big group, I don't know. This is why we need chairs. perhaps. I'm sorry, I did promise. We're not insured for any whiplash injuries from turning around. So pray for some of the things that have come up. Pray that if they're of God, that they will happen. And also, just pray for one another.
Way to go. I've got a hard road to travel and a rough way to go. But I can't turn back. My heart is fixed. My mind's made up. I'll never stop. My faith will see me through. I'm all alone. This lonesome road I roam. I've got no love to call my very own. Oh, the river gets deeper, hills get steeper, and the pain gets deeper every day. Hey, I've got a hard road to travel and a rough way to go. Said it's a hard road to travel and a rough way to go. But I can't turn back. My heart is fixed.
Shall we stand together? This song was picked up by an advert. It's actually a spiritual, but it talks about being a hard road to travel, a road that we travel on our own, which I think is what people suspect that the church is about. But of course, the greatest thing we offer to one another is companions on the journey. I may not be passionate about cabbages, but I might walk with a man who is. I may not be passionate about conservation, but I might come and help someone who is. And that's how church works. Our different passions blending together so that we walk the hard road together. So let's be still for a moment, conscious of the people around us, conscious of the journeys that we're traveling together. So I'd like you to turn to the person next to you, not bless them or share the peace with them, but say, I will walk with you as we end our service and ask God's blessing. I'll walk with you. I will walk with you. I will walk with you. Sounds exciting. I will walk with you. 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 I will walk with you.
Yeah, that's what you say.
I will walk with you. I walk with you, Brenda.
I'll walk with you, James, I think.
Could be a very wild journey. I walk with you. The first Christian cabbage group. Here we come. I walk with you, Barry. Steadily and slowly.
Yes.
I walk with you, Alan. And if I can do something for the African stuff, I'd love to.
Yeah, well, we'll sit down and...
Yeah, because I haven't really got engaged with that, and I need to.
We're just leaving,
Yeah, steady as we go.
Don't rush.
The only thing that's bothering me, James, about all this is how busy we're going to be. And now we're going to have to restructure some of the things already going on.
So long as we're all
to put
busy.
other things in.